Sorry, it's always a little nerve-wracking to go first. So my name is Bobbi Kyle, and my project is called eddit. Basically, it's about combining education with design, interaction, and technology. What I'm interested in are the online tools that universities use to deliver content to students before and after classes. What I want to do is to envision a new tool, particularly for creatives or people in creative fields, to go alongside of classrooms, to work with students and studio-based learning specifically, and to replace old, outdated systems like Moodle and Blackboard. So the question I get most often is, why is an ID student doing an interaction project? So I just wanted to touch down on that briefly. It's because I think that innovation happens in the spaces between disciplines. That on one hand, design, especially industrial design, considers the 3D, physical, visual, and emotional processes with learning and doing. But interaction design, on the other hand, really considers experiential frameworks and time. So I thought it would be a really cool way to look at education is to take those things, examine each of their frameworks, and to approach it by combining them together. And basically, right now, I'm dubbing this educational experience design. So my approach, kind of in a nutshell, is to bring that 3D thinking into the 2D world by splicing and remixing. And I'll just let you know how it began. I started noticing that the students around me in the studio really don't enjoy using these online systems. There's just something about them that doesn't translate well to what we're doing. So for the time being, I did a lot of research, just talking to students, teachers, trying to find out what it is that isn't working for them and what's not working well. And I was able to reject theories, fortunately, that all study materials are boring or that we're just not engaged in the content. We really are. Students of design and dynamic media love their field, and they're there because they really enjoy learning about it. So the problem wasn't the content, accessibility, or a lack of features. Really, what it boiled down to were the frameworks themselves. There's a fundamental disconnect between how online content is delivered to students and how students want to experience it. And this is something that I think we can address. Not surprisingly, it has a lot to do with those 3D processes of doing and how they're translated into the 2D. I'll give you an example. This might be a somewhat, or at least a relatable representation of what it's like to go into our library, for example, and to look through the archives and to find books, magazines, and digital media. When we imagine that physical process of doing it, this really doesn't seem like that far of a stretch for us. We can relate to the 2D representation and the visual metaphor that's being used to stand in for that 3D process. So that said, when you look at something like this, you can see how it doesn't really relate all that much to environments that look a lot more like these. So this is studio culture at Carr. And it's not just from one framework that doesn't work, it's really all of them. They sort of look and function in the same way. They feel very static, they're not very dynamic, they don't relate to the processes of what we do in design and in art in general. And I think that there's just room for change. So, just a little doodle for you of how I myself felt about using these systems online. What I think we need to do is to stop asking students to adapt to these unnatural frameworks. I think that we need to start adapting the frameworks to students. So just to give you an example, is this an opportunity lost or is it an entry point? I think there's room for design. As students, as the largest user groups, they make really great co-developers, and that's something I found out during my process. McLuhan was right about a medium's effect on its message. Maybe in this case, we can't change the medium, but we can have some fun with this framework. So I started thinking, what would happen when an industrial designer starts messing with frameworks? And I'll give you a pretty cool example. This is called the Duffy London swing table. And it might be a bit unorthodox, but it does something really, really well. It takes a framework that's meant to hold something else and adapts it for use in a really different environment. And this is the approach that I wanted to try to use in my project. So I started thinking, if systems for students of design and dynamic media had a system that felt a lot more like this, shouldn't it do a lot more for us, be fun and playful and energetic? Couldn't it feel the same way? This is how I envision it to be. This is eddit's main interface. What I did was make it highly visual. I gave it movement, interaction, and I made it so that students don't have to be bored by the content. It doesn't have to read like an IT manual. I also used the framework of a portfolio when I started creating it, because I thought the perfect metaphor for a school of design would be a highly visual portfolio. And what it ended up doing was becoming a cognitive map of the campus. Students are able to browse resources, learn about some of the facilities and things available to them on the campus, but they're also able to still view their courses in a linear fashion. They can have sips of information, but they can also take deep dives into the content and immerse themselves. So I wasn't really done thinking about frameworks yet. The interaction designer part of me decided that I needed to nest frameworks within frameworks, and this is basically how eddit is composed. And also I started thinking about neural behaviors. So scientists used to think that the brain functioned in the hierarchical fashion, but it actually functions more like the distributed network of the internet. So this brought up two main ideas. First, the medium isn't necessarily a bad way to deliver the message, and why does it have to be linear all the time? And my answer is it doesn't. Linear content can still be delivered in the same fashion with eddit, but non-linear content can still be delivered in a non-linear fashion, just like we browse and like we research. So to give you an example of that, class resources, when they're posted, they auto-thumbnail, they auto-caption, they can be sorted by class, but they appear by default all together so students can make connections where they wish. Students are also able to sort by topic or tag for related projects or works that other students might be doing. It's just a great way to bring out different types of thinking that you might not have already incorporated into your work. Students can then browse other people's projects. They can read descriptions, give feedback, post links. And what this really leads to is interdisciplinary exchange. And I think this would be a great way for students to re-envision how they interact online when they're looking at their educational material. Really, there's a lot that eddit does. Since I have limited time, I'm just going to recap for you. The three things that eddit does really well. It aggregates content in a very visual and stimulating way. It disseminates the resources, both linear and non-linear. And it cross-pollinates. It allows for interdisciplinary exchange, growth, and feedback. Thank you.